So we were thinking that we would start by reading a portion of our essays with you guys tonight. Does that sound okay? We'll start there. America, do you want to start with yours?
Yeah, I would love to start.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm going to read sort of the first half of my introduction to the book as a whole. As you know, or as I think you know by now, it's a compilation of personal essays and stories, and I sort of wrote an introductory piece to the sort of the why of this, for me, my why of this. Okay. Also, like, this is so new to me. So I feel sometimes like I'm like in the movie at the part where like you wrote a book and now you're reading from it. That's the like scene that's playing out in my head. Okay, here I go. My name is America, and at 9 years old, I hate my name. Not because I hate my country. No, in fact, at 9 years old, I love my country. When the national anthem plays, I cry into my Dodger dog, thinking about how lucky I am to live in the only nation in the world where someone like me will grow up to be the first girl to play for the Dodgers. I do hate the Pledge of Allegiance, though, not because I don't believe in it. I believe every word of it, especially the liberty and justice for all part. I believe the Pledge of Allegiance to my bones, and at 9 years old, I feel honored, self-righteous, and quite smug that I was smart enough to be born in the one country in the whole world that stands for the things my little heart knows to be true. We are all the same and deserve an equal shot at life, liberty, and a place on the Dodgers batting lineup. I hate the Pledge of Allegiance because for as long as I can remember, there is always at least one smartass in class who turns to face me with his hand over his heart to recite it. You know, because my name is America. The first day of every school year is always hell. Teachers always make a big deal of my name in front of the whole class. They either think it's a typo and want to know what my real name is, or they want to know how to pronounce it. Ridiculous, I know. And they always follow up with, America? You mean like the country? Yes, like the country, I say, with my eyes on my desk and my skin burning hot. This is how I come to hate American history. Not because I don't love saying the Battle of Ticonderoga, obviously I do, but because no teacher has ever been more excited to meet a student named America than my first American history teacher. He's been waiting all day to meet me, and so to commemorate this moment, he wheels me around the classroom on his fancy teacher's chair, belting God Bless America, while a small part of me dies inside. His face reminds me of Eeyore's when I say, actually, I like to go by my middle name, Georgina, so could you please make a note of it on the roster paper thingy? Thanks. When he has the gall to ask me why, I say something like, it's just easier, instead of what I really want to say, which is, because people like you make my name unbearably embarrassing. And another thing, I'm not actually named after the United States of America. I'm named after my mother, who was born and raised in Honduras. That's in Central America, in case you've never heard of it. Also part of the Americas. And if you must know, she was born on an obscure holiday called Dia de las Americas, which not even people in Honduras know that much about, but my grandfather was a librarian and knew weird shit like that. This is a holiday that celebrates all the Americas, South, Central, and North, not just the United States of. So, my name has nothing to do with amber waves of grain, purple mountains, the US flag, or your very narrow definition of it. It's my mother's name, and a word that also relates to other countries, like the one my parents come from. So please refrain from limiting the meaning of my name, erasing my family's history, and making me the least popular kid in class in all one fell swoop. Just call me Georgina, please. I don't say any of this to anyone, ever. It would be impolite, or worse, unpatriotic. And as I said before, I love my country in the most unironic and earnest way anyone can love anything. I know just how lucky I am to be an American because every time I complain about too much homework, my mother reminds me that in Honduras, I'd be working to help support the family. So I better thank my lucky stars that she sacrificed everything she had so that my malcriada self and my 5 siblings could one day have too much homework. It's a perspective that has me embracing Little League Baseball, the 4th of July, and ABC's TGIF lineup of wholesome American family comedies with more fervor than most. I feel more American than Belky Bartakamis, the Winslows, and the Tanners combined. And I truly believe that one day I will grow up to look like Aunt Becky from Full House, and then Frank Sinatra will ask me to re-record I've Got You Under My Skin as a duet, because obviously I know all the words better than my siblings. So I just let it slide when people respond to my name with, wow, your parents must be very patriotic. Where are they actually from? This is a refrain I hear often, and one that will take me a couple of decades to unpack for all its implications and assumptions. I learned to go along with the casting of my parents as the poor immigrants yearning to breathe free, who made it to the promised land and decided to name their American daughter after the soil that would fulfill all their dreams. After all, it is a beautiful and endearing tale. Only later do I learn to bristle and push back against this incomplete narrative, a narrative which manages to erase my parents' history, their true experience, and their claim to the name America long before they had a US-born child. Never mind that they already had a US-born child before me, and they named her Jennifer, which is both a much more American name than mine and one I would have killed to have on the first day of every school year. But I am 9, and I do not think about narratives and my parents' erased history. I think about my friends and getting to go over to their houses where we play their brand new Mall Madness board game and search Disney movies for the secret sex images you can see if you know where to pause the VHS. I think about how cool it would be if my mom ever let me actually sleep over at a friend's house, and how that will never happen because she's convinced all sleepovers end in murder and sexual assault. I think about how cool it would be if my friend was allowed to sleep over at my house, and how that will never happen because her parents, who are also immigrants, happen to agree with my mom about the murder and sexual assault thing. I think about how when I'm in junior high and I look more like Aunt Becky, I will have a locker and decorate it with mirrors and magazine cutouts like all the kids on Saved by the Bell. I think about how I will grow up to be a professional baseball player, actress, civil rights lawyer, and veterinarian who will let her kids go to sleepovers. And I think about boys. Well, I think about one boy, a lot. Aside from having a challenging name, I feel just like all my friends. Even all the things that make my home life different than their home life seems to unify our experience. I mean, sure, my parents speak Spanish at home, but Grace's parents speak Chinese, and Mohammed's parents speak another distinct language that I can't name, and Brianne's Filipino parents speak something that sounds a little like Spanish, but isn't. My favorite part of going over to my friend's house is hearing their parents yell at them in different languages and eating whatever their family considers an after-school snack. Brianne and I consumed an alarming amount of white rice soaked in soy sauce while we stretched in the dark listening to her mom's Mariah Carey album. Speaking Spanish at home, my mom's Saturday morning salsa dance party in the kitchen, and eating tamales alongside apple pie at Christmas do not in any way seem at odds with my American identity. In fact, having parents with deep ties to another country feels part and parcel of being an American. I am 9, and I truly belong. By the time I reach 10, this all begins to change. The first person to make me feel like a stranger in a strange land is the first boy I ever love. I am 6 years old when I fall in love with Sam Spencer, name changed to avoid awkward Facebook interactions. And the full agony of loving Sam is bursting out of my tiny bones and pulsing through my tiny veins. He has very silky, soft brown hair that is almost entirely short except for the rat's tail that dangles down the nape of his neck. I sit behind Sam on the magic carpet at reading time, and I try to be sneaky about braiding his rat's tail. Whether we're making pizza bagels or building castles in the sandbox, all my little 6-year-old mind can focus on during Miss Wildstein's kindergarten class is braiding Sam's hair, talking to Sam, and sitting near Sam. With every passing year, new boys and girls are added to our class, but my heart remains fully devoted to worshiping at the altar of Sam Spencer. By the time we're in 3rd grade, I'm aware that other girls also think Sam is one of the cute boys, but I'm secure in the deep foundation we built back in kindergarten. When I sit next to him at lunch, he does not tell me to go away, and that has to mean something. I don't need to tell him I love him or need him to declare his love for me. I just need to sit next to him on the reading carpet and stand as close to him in the lunch line as possible. I'm fulfilled with making him laugh from across the classroom by taking my long brown hair and turning it into a mustache and beard on my face. I think of him as mine because my heart says he is. What more proof do I need? I never imagined that our relationship will ever need to be spoken about. One day, we, the students of Miss Kalichek's third grade class, are lined up after lunch. I'm locking arms and stifling giggles with my girlfriends, Jenna and Allison, when Sam taps my shoulder. This is unusual. He is not often the initiator of our conversations. I turn to him very attentively and wait. He opens his mouth to say, I like Jenna more than you. Do you want to know why? The masochist in me answers too quickly. Why? He says, because she has blue eyes and lighter skin than you. He turns and rejoins his group of boys. I stand there frozen, ice cold, learning how fast a heart beats the first time it is crushed by love, how quietly skin crawls the first time its color is mentioned, how wet eyes become when they realize for the first time that they are in fact not blue like Jenna's, the color Sam likes better. I stand there wishing to return to the moment before Sam taps me on the shoulder, before I learn that it would be better to not look like me. Well, at least if you want the first and only boy you've ever loved to love you back, which I do. Shortly after, I learned that it is also better not to look like me if you don't want to be singled out at school and questioned about your parents' immigration status. It is 1994. And California just voted in favor of Proposition 187, an initiative to deny undocumented immigrants and their children public services, including access to public education for kindergarten through university. There's fear inside the immigrant community that their children will be harassed and questioned in their schools. I'm in third grade and do not know or understand any of this. Nonetheless, my mom pulls me aside one day when she's dropping me off at school and she says, "You are American. You were born in this country. If anyone asks you questions, you don't need to feel ashamed or embarrassed. You've done nothing wrong." I'm so confused, but I take my mom's advice and I feel the need to spread it. I mention to some of my friends that people might be asking them questions and that they shouldn't be afraid, that they've done nothing wrong. They stare blankly at me and then go about their hopscotch. None of my friends seem to know what I'm talking about. I have the sneaking suspicion that their parents did not pull them aside to have this same talk. While I'm grilling more friends on the playground about whether they've been questioned about being American, a big kid I don't know interrupts me to say, "They don't care about us. It's just Americans like you." My mind short circuits. Americans like me? What does that mean? I wasn't aware there were different kinds of Americans. American is American is American, all created equal, liberty and justice for all. I managed to say something to the big kid like, "Oh." And I never talk about it at school again. I never talk about it at home either. But I do spend some time wondering what the big kid means by Americans like you. Is it about my name? Is it the salsa music at home? Maybe this has something to do with my skin and my non-blue eyes again. Now, that's ridiculous. We don't separate Americans by the color of their eyes, do we? Are there different words for different kinds of Americans? Am I half American, kind of American, other American? I am 9 years old, and suddenly I am wondering, what do I call an American like me?
You have such a powerful and important story, and when I first read that, I know it was tugging at all the heartstrings. And your story is so relatable to so many people. I just want to ask you a question before I go into mine. So hearing your story, like I want to hear so much more of like your childhood and other things that you went through. When did it click for you when you knew you wanted to make this book, that it was going to be not just your story, but include all of your friends because you knew they had similar situations?
Yeah, right from the beginning. I had a book agent for 10 years. I had never written a book, but he was like my book agent for 10 years. And he was always saying like, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I never really I didn't know what I would write. I wasn't like ready to sit down and write my autobiography. I'd like to think I have more to go. But he came to me shortly after the election, no big surprise, and said, I think that this is a really timely time we need to be hearing stories about the immigrant experience, and maybe there should be like a collection of essays, and you should curate and edit it. And, for some reason, I thought about it, and I thought, something isn't clicking for me in that. And what I realized was like, that's not my experience. Like, I'm not an immigrant in this country. I am an American. I am born and raised in America. I have always felt 100% American and always felt deeply tied to my family's culture, and at the same time felt like I never really got to be either one of those things. And that's an experience that I've never seen reflected back at me in culture, in my culture growing up. And one that just immediately lit a fire in me, because I thought, God, if I'd grown up knowing that other people had this experience like me, being stuck between cultures, I wouldn't have felt so alone all the time. And I would have loved to see that experience reflected back at me in the shows that I watched, the books I read. And so from the beginning, it was always not just about my story. It was the point was that we're not alone in this experience. Right. And it's not even just a Latino experience. It's Chinese American and Muslim American and African American, and and that's why I got so thrilled to invite all these incredible people, including yourself, to join and tell their story. And what's so beautiful is that whether their parents or grandparents came from India or Nigeria or Hong Kong or wherever it was, our experiences were so aligned and so similar. And so it was always about identifying ourselves as a community, as a group of people who exist in the world, and not as outsiders, not as foreigners, but as a part of this American fabric. And so that's how the idea for the book really came into focus for me.
And you said something really important right now when you said I didn't feel like I could fully be either one. And I feel like having that same experience, there's so much shame and guilt on that because we don't see it in TV, movies, or whatever. We don't see that story, that I remember being very embarrassed that I wasn't fully one or the other. And when I was with this group, I would feel embarrassed that I wasn't enough of this and I wasn't enough of this. And had we known growing up that we weren't the only one, had we saw that on TV, in a movie or whatever, I feel like there would be less shame and guilt and whatever, and just acceptance of who we are.
Yeah, and I remember it going even beyond embarrassment. I just felt lonely and I didn't belong anywhere. I would be with my American friends, or my white friends, and there were always subtle ways that they let me know that I wasn't one of them, But I also couldn't go hang out with the Latinas, and because they would look at me and think I was some whitewashed, American, because I, spoke a certain way, or I was a drama geek. And I mean, if they hated me for being a drama geek, that's cool, deserved. But they didn't want to have anything to do with me because I didn't appeal to them and their culture either. So I just remember it being such a lonely experience. And remember being in college the first time I realized wait, I'm not the only person who feels this way, as most people in college realize that they're not that original. And then realizing God, how could I have gotten this far without knowing that there were other people like me, that there were in fact millions of people like me, that in fact the whole basis of this country is based on people like me, whose parents come from somewhere else and you have to find a new identity. And so I would say that the passion for getting these stories out there is something I've lived with for almost my whole life, and to me, such a dream come true that it has come together and is now out. And I sorry to toot my own horn, guys, or our own horn, but I just found out that the book is a New York Times bestseller, the first one. So, which is important. Which is important because it sends the message that our stories matter and that people want to relate to these stories and want to hear these stories.
I had a girl tweet me yesterday, and she took a picture of a portion of my essay and attached 2 pictures of herself growing up. And she was like, this was so important to me because seeing my story reflected, I've never seen it in a movie or a TV show, let alone a book, but being able to read my story, and you'll hear some of it right now, but then she attached a couple photos that look like the photo of me that's in here, and so she was basically like, thank you, like I feel seen, like how you were saying it's been lonely, and I feel seen. And what's funny is hearing her say that and then attaching the photo of her growing up looking like me growing up made me feel heard and seen all over again. It was like a whole thing of like, yeah, I see you too. We're in this together, you know? It was a really cool moment. Okay, so I'll read some of mine. Growing up, I wanted to be more Latino than I felt I actually was. My name is Anjelah Nicole Johnson. Legally, it's spelled Angela, which isn't exactly the spicy Latina name I wish I had. You know, like Jasmine Sanchez or Yvette Gonzalez, or really anything that ends in "ez." Johnson is a white last name, or black, depending on how you say it. I don't speak Spanish, and I didn't grow up in a super Mexican area, but like many Mexican Americans, I have a huge family who takes pride in honoring Latino traditions. But we'd always throw in the good old American ones as well. For example, we eat tamales with rice and beans for Christmas, but we have ham and mashed potatoes on the side. We have a family reunion every 2 years with more than 500 people in attendance. Only a Mexican family can pull that off. However, at this reunion, we take part in some good old American traditional things like bingo, potato sack races, bobbing for apples, barbecue, and a game of horseshoes. I grew up in a neighborhood in San Jose, California, that was home to many different ethnicities. We had Latinos, Asians, Portuguese, white people, approximately 3 Indians, and 1 black guy. We lived down the street from big technology companies right in the heart of Silicon Valley. Cisco Systems, 3Com, Sun Microsystems, and IBM, just to name a few. My neighbors were some of the smartest people in the Bay Area, but I didn't aspire to be smart and work for a tech company. My dream was to be a chola. Around the age of 12, I had made up my mind. I wanted to wear the dark lip liner, the bandana, the feathered hair. I wanted the Nike Cortez with creased up Dickies pants held up with an oversized belt buckle that was engraved with my initials. Or better yet, the initials of a guy I could be dating who had tattoos all over his neck and looked like Benjamin Bratt in the movie Blood In, Blood Out. So dreamy. I wanted to listen to oldies and go cruising downtown in a lowrider, a 64 Impala with hydraulics to be specific. Unfortunately for me, cholas didn't exist in my neighborhood. They lived in downtown San Jose or on the east side. And even more unfortunate for me, I was just your run-of-the-mill, prepubescent brown girl. My typical afternoon activities included doing Pop Warner cheerleading and playing with my friends outside. When I was first allowed to wear makeup, my mom wanted me to start off light. So she got me just 1 lip liner and a chapstick. Little did she know, she had handed me the Chola starter kit I had always dreamed of. Now all I needed was some eyeliner and a can of Aquanet hairspray and I'd be on my way. There was just something so appealing about being a tough chick. They didn't care what other people thought of them. They didn't wish to be more Latino than they felt they actually were, the way I did. Plus, I think my parents' divorce may have had a bigger effect on me than I let on, making me want to avoid ever feeling vulnerable. I became driven in my early teens to protect myself from ever getting hurt. And what better way than to surround myself with a gang, or at least people who look like they were in a gang. My mind was set on it, except I couldn't really handle being in a gang because that would mean I would have to get jumped in. And I have a very low tolerance for pain. I can hardly handle emotional pain, much less physical. I can't even watch sad movies because I think about them as if they were my own life, and my body doesn't know the difference. After a movie, I walk around depressed, visibly so. People are like, "What happened?" And I'm like, "She had room for Jack on that piece of wood." He didn't have to die. Maybe this is also why I wanted to look tougher. I wanted that life where I could just call my homegirls if I ever needed backup in a fight, even though I would try to avoid fights at all costs. I got myself a voicemail pager to feel more like I had a huge crew at all times. For those of you young kids who have no idea how things used to work, the pager was a device I would wear on my belt or sticking out of my pants pocket that would beep at me whenever someone called a number to leave me a voice message. I could then find a landline or a payphone and call the number to check my voice messages. It was a 3-step process. Very gangsta. Or they could just page me their callback number and it would appear on my pager screen. Everyone had their own pager code. Mine was the number 7. So I could page a guy I liked, my phone number with the code number 7. He would know that it was me paging. Kind of like texting through a landline phone. You could also send coded messages. For instance, if you wanted to say, "I miss you" to someone, you would page 1-177-155-400. Because that is supposed to look like the words, "I miss you." Some popular shortcuts were 143 for "I love you," 823 for "I'm thinking of you," and on a different note, 187, which meant death or "I will kill you." My homegirl Monica and I would change the voicemail greeting every week to tell people to leave a message, but also to either give a shout out to a boy we liked or to call out some girls who were trying to fight us. It would sound something like, "Yeah, what's up, what's up? You know he got a hold up. Go ahead and drop that message after the beep. We'll get back to you. I just want to say what's up to Hector, a.k.a. Little Smiley. And also, if this is that one chick who keeps paging us, 187, why don't you just go ahead and leave a time and a place and we can meet up and you could tell us to our face." "Yeah, that's what I thought. You ain't down. Aight then. Late, peace, outie, I'm gone. A rato, vato." My 13-year-old self would be very disappointed that I'm not a chola today. But
Wait, I wanted to ask you, because for me, like when I got to, because the big part of the job was editing all the other pieces. And when I got to read everybody's pieces, I found myself like weeping and laughing and like realizing that like I had given myself this incredible gift of like hearing everybody's funny, heartbreaking stories and realizing what I already knew, which was how much I needed that. But I had sort of removed myself, like, kids need this, young people need this. But then I read it and was like, oh my God, I need this. I need this so much. Like, how did you, when you said yes, A, like, why did you say yes? And B, like, when you did, like, how did you decide what you wanted to write about and, like, why that?
I said yes because it was just such an important message and a great opportunity that I would love to be a part of. And if you didn't invite me, I'd be very upset with you. But I chose this story because when you talk about being a part of two different cultures, that was my childhood growing up. Like, to me, Latinos were the cholos. Like, that was who I admired, because if you were a gangster or a cholo, that mean you were like fully Latino, like you were accepted, you were a part of the culture. And I always aspired to be more. Like my last name Johnson, I had the hardest time all throughout until I was an adult. I hated my last name, like you hated your first name. I hated it because it it didn't give me an identity. It didn't give me something to say, oh, I'm this. So when I became a comedian and an actress, and then I got married to a guy with the last name Reyes, I finally got my Latino last name, but I was already Brandon Johnson. Everybody already knew me as Anjelah Johnson, so I was like, whatever, hyphen Reyes now. But it was that story that I tell is like what stands out to me when I think about balancing two cultures is just how I grew up wanting to be more of this and more of this and less of this, and you know what I mean? Just that whole struggle that I went through. And so immediately I was like, I'm gonna write about this story.
Yeah. You were saying, before you started reading, you started talking about the young woman who tweeted and said, seeing myself and what that's like. And because Josefina's in the audience, and I don't know if I've ever told her this story, I wanted to kind of go backwards a little bit and talk about the very first time in my career that I realized how important it was for people to see themselves. Like, I wasn't looking to be a role model. I wasn't looking to, like, represent people. I was just looking to do what I love to do. I would have done that Oreo cookie commercial, I wasn't looking to, power to the people. But I got so insanely lucky because the first film I ever did was Real Women Have Curves. And the movie was, I thought I was in such denial. I'm like, oh, I'm not this girl at all. Like, I'll just, I'll go in, I'll really, build the character. Like, meanwhile, it's like a documentary of my life. And we got to travel the country and really the world with this film and see that it wasn't just people like me who saw themselves in this movie. Like, I would meet 60-year-old, gay black men who were like, that's me. I'm that Mexican girl from East LA, realizing how much, how hungry people were to see themselves. And I shot Real Women Have Curves, and then I went to college. I went to USC to study international relations. Any Trojans, or was that a Bruin? Oh, okay, Trojans. Really? Just one Trojan? Oh, the one back there. I went to USC to study international relations, and I started learning about the world. This was 2001. 9/11 had happened. I had a public school education, so I couldn't point Afghanistan out on a map. And I was learning about the world outside of my tiny little bubble, and my mind was being blown. And I just thought, what the hell? I can't be an actress. The world is ailing and someone has to fix it. And how could I just go do something as frivolous as being an actor when the world needs so much saving? And I remember going to one of my professor's office hours. He was this 70-year-old white man who left business and wanted to inspire kids to change the world. So I went into his office sobbing and crying and saying I think I have to quit acting and do something important with my life. And I had no idea. I was a freshman. I had no idea he knew who I was. And he stops to tell me, he says, I have this girl that I mentor for 3 years now from one of the high schools. She's a Latina like you. And I'm like, oh, great. Now he's going to make me his pet Latina, right? And, he goes on to talk, and he says, I've been mentoring this girl for 3 years, and she's never really trusted me, but nonetheless, meets me for coffee once a month. I try to give her advice, blah, blah, blah. And after 3 years, she finally says to me, do you really want to know what my life is like? And he's like, yeah. And she said, then come watch this movie with me. It's called Real Women Have Curves. And he took this girl to go see Real Women Have Curves with 5 of her friends. And he said he sat there and watched these girls laugh and cry, and then afterwards talk about how they had never, ever, ever seen their life reflected back at them like that. And more importantly, the girl says to him, he's mentoring her to go to college, and she says to him, like, you meet me once a month and tell me about what I should do to go to college, and you don't understand that, like, my parents in my own home don't understand why I should be going to college. Like, this is what I'm up against. And that's one of the storylines for my character in the movie. And he buys the DVD, takes it to her family, and they're like, who is this white man at our door? And he's like, will you watch this DVD? And the parents watched the movie, and then he asked if he could talk to them and talk to them about why it mattered to support their daughter's dream to go to college. And ultimately they did, and she ended up going to college. And he tells me this story as I'm like, snotting out of my nose and saying like, what am I gonna do with my life? And it was in that moment, the gift he gave me of that moment was realizing like that how important it is for us to see ourselves in the world around us, and how that truly impacts what we believe is possible for ourselves. And that for me was a turning point in my life and in my career, where I realized, yes, my whole life people have said like, isn't it such a burden to have to be a role model, or what does it feel like to have to represent everyone? Is that such anxiety? And from that moment on, I just saw it as an opportunity. Like every room I walk into, it's an opportunity to potentially create a space where someone like me could be accepted and respected. And if I can, then there's room that I could possibly be making room for other people to walk into that space the same way and see themselves, just knowing that they exist. And so that has been, part of what's driven me in my career from the very beginning, because I was lucky enough to be cast in Josefina's movie, and to see the incredible impact that movie had on so many people's lives.
That is such a powerful story. Good on that professor too. Like, no, you're not gonna give up acting for what you think is more important, and just reinforcing that. I recently had a show somewhere that was actually an all ages venue, and I have a poster of me out by the door. It's like a banner that comes down, and I'm just kind of like posed on it. And somebody posted a picture and tagged me, and it was this little Latina girl doing the same pose like me, standing right by it. And it just did something to my heart, because I would have never, growing up, I didn't know what a stand-up comedian was. Mm-hmm. And when I did start to realize what stand-up comedy was, I would watch BET's Comic View, which was all black comics. So why would I see somebody who looks like me? Why would I have the audacity to think I could do something like that? But to see this little Latina girl have like an option, have somebody give her permission to dream, was a powerful moment for me too. Yeah. Where are we on time?
Should we
ask questions
from the audience? Yeah.
Let's. Does anybody have a question?
Okay, so I will bring the microphone to anyone who might have a question. Just a reminder, questions around here generally start with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They're generally short. There's no such thing as a two-part question, and only Anjelah gets to ask follow-up questions.
Wait, we can't ask two parts. So,
Into the microphone.
I'm debating my question. I have two questions for. So, for you, I want to know, how did you know about cholas if you didn't grow up in an environment? And then for you, what if you're not apologetic? What if you're not apologetic about who you are, and you just are made to feel guilty for being how you are, but that's just how you are? Either you're more Americanized or more Latina, and you're okay with being that way, but other people make you feel guilty for being whitewashed. Like,
yes, what's the question?
like, well, what if you're not apologetic? You're giving us, like, your army. Is that an okay option?
Yeah, I mean, if you can get there, be unapologetic, absolutely. I mean, I don't know anyone, I've never met anyone who's managed to not be a product of the people around them. And, I write in the book about how, with my own family, like I remember being a kid and trying to speak Spanish and like the grown-ups laugh at you, right? So it's like the last, if you want kids to do something, like don't laugh at them when they try, right? But I was constantly told about how, from that side, how I wasn't, you get told that what you are is not the ideal or the norm, or you don't belong. And so maybe there's a way to get through those situations feeling fully intact and like you don't care what your parents and your grandparents and your aunts and your uncles and your cousins say about you. But I was deeply affected, and I think it wasn't necessarily that I didn't grow up feeling like I had to apologize all the time. I think I would just amend it slightly, like I did before, and say, I just grew up feeling lonely. Like, I just grew up feeling like I didn't know where I really did belong. I didn't know where I could be and say, like, oh, I can just be me. I can be as American as I am and as Latina as I am, and maybe not enough of any of those things and maybe too much, and that I'm okay just being exactly what I am. I never found that space. Actually, a couple years ago, I was registering voters, and I sat in a car with 5 Latina college-educated women, and like someone cracked a joke, and we all laughed really loud, and I was like, oh, is this what it feels like to be around people who are like you and like don't make you feel bad about what you don't know? And like I just remember like being a full adult, like a grown-ass woman, the first time I felt like, oh my God, like I feel like I really belong in this car. And that's not an experience that I've had much of growing up.
Yep.
I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, I think what you're saying is the ideal. Like, yes, I wish that we could all grow up and be unapologetically who we are.
I think I was being that way to be spiteful. I was like proving to them that you could be different variations, even though they were telling you how it should have been.
Yeah, and I would say that, in spite of all of how I felt about who I was, I still was who I was, and I couldn't run from those things. I was all the things, no matter what, in spite of myself trying to shed these things when I walked into these spaces or those spaces. That process that so many of us experience of like shedding the parts of ourselves that we know don't belong in certain rooms or in certain spaces or certain conversations, I've just come to realize how that diminishes my insides, how it makes me feel so small on the inside to have to say, this part of me and who I am isn't allowed in this space. And as an adult who has done this, has spent 10 years in therapy and done a lot of thinking around my own identity, I work every day to show up in each and every space as everything that I am. And even as an adult, with all the resources in the world, that's not always an easy thing to do. And so, yes, I think there are parts of me that are always unapologetic about who I am, but it has been a painful and lonely road getting to that place. And I want it to be different for the next generation.
That moment you're talking about in the car where you're like, is this what it feels like? And laughing at the joke, it reminds me of my Latina friends who speak Spanish, and they know that I don't speak Spanish, but they'll still like include me in it, and I'll just like pick the 5 words that I know, and be like they still let me be a part of it. I have this one friend, Rebecca. She knows I don't speak Spanish, and she always talks to me in Spanish, and I love it because I'm like, yeah, I'm a part of it.
Wait, did you answer the question? How did you know about cholas?
From school, from movies. Like, I I remember in elementary school, there was this one girl, Linda, who was like full on Chola. We were only like 5th grade, but she was full on Chola. Her mom was full on Chola, and I was like, oh man, one day I'll be like Linda. But also like movies, like if you wanted to see yourself on TV, we were The Maid, or we were in Blood In, Blood Out, or Mi Vida Loca, or something like that. And it was so glorified, and it was so, even still now, like when I see like lowriders or whatever, it's still like I love the culture. The Chicano, Cholo vibe, like that culture, I still love it. I just went to the county fair on the last day before it closed, and they have like all the airbrush shirts, and I did buy myself a lowrider t-shirt, like just like a classic. It looks like the sign in the back of a lowrider, like if you're in a car club, and I was like, yeah, I need that t-shirt.
But the thing that I love the part in your story when you go on, where you talk about like what you love so much, what you saw in these cholas was a sort of unapologetic power of saying like, this is, I know exactly who I am and what I am, and that your attraction was in large part that, wanting to be able to be unapologetic and to know exactly who you were.
Yeah, that was something that the cholas represented to me. They were unapologetic. They were exactly who they were. They would talk however they talk, whether you like it or not. That's what I wanted. Any other questions?
Hi. So I'm 3rd generation Mexican American, and I can't tell you how much it means to me to hear that you don't speak Spanish. My mom's 2nd generation. She doesn't speak Spanish because her parents didn't teach them Spanish, heard their kids Spanish as a way of assimilating into American culture.
Same.
And I'm kind of curious, as you put this book together and in your own personal experiences, why these conversations never happened with other, 2nd generation, 1st generation immigrants who had multiple cultures. How is this only a conversation now? It's certainly not a conversation my mom, who doesn't speak Spanish, had with me. I didn't feel okay about it until a coworker who's Latina said, it's okay that you don't speak Spanish. And I felt this like huge weight come off my shoulders. I was like, oh my God, I can identify as Latina but not speak Spanish. But this wasn't a conversation that came from my mother or that came from other friends who were 3rd generation or 2nd generation immigrants, and I'm kind of wondering why, aside from the obvious political climate that currently exists, why you think that's the case.
For me, I think it has a lot to do with what I said earlier about shame and guilt. For me personally, I would feel shameful that I don't speak Spanish, so why would I ever say that out loud? And early on in my stand-up career, the first jokes that I wrote, I portrayed my parents as Spanish speaking and broken English because it was funny, because I could do the accent. So my first jokes, my mom, when I impersonate her, she has a broken English accent and all of that, and I pretended that I grew up speaking Spanish, and because I thought that's what people wanted to hear from me, and they wouldn't want to hear like the truth because that's like shameful and embarrassing. And it wasn't until maybe 3 years into doing stand-up comedy, telling jokes about myself, that I actually started to own who I was and be more truthful and transparent in who I am. And then I ended up writing a whole joke about the fact that I don't speak Spanish and just owned it and put it all out there. And I talked about my struggles with it and how I'm embarrassed and like, don't look at me in the eyes, like I just put it all out there. And it was so liberating to do that for me. So for me, it came down to just shame. I felt shameful.
I think one really interesting theme throughout all the different contributors, regardless of what countries their families had immigrated from, is that there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lack of conversation from generation to generation. Seems to be a very wide experience. I know for me, like, I knew so little about who my parents were. Uzo writes so beautifully about how when you're the child of immigrants, you never get to see your parents as children. that like their life in your mind starts when they came to this country to give you your life. And that resonated so much with me because I never went back to the country my parents came from until I was 26 years old. Like I couldn't even picture the country they came from or who they were as children, and they never talked to me about it. You know, there's so much sort of this like silent communication as children. You know what you're allowed to talk about and what you're not allowed to talk about. And when you have parents who gave up a lot, and some parents who came from war-torn countries or came as refugees or gave things up so that you could assimilate and be successful here and now. There's so much in the past that is lost and not passed down. And for me, I will say from my personal experience, I know that it came from a place of love. My mom wanted us to be successful. She wanted us to have every opportunity, and she had this idea that if she messed up our ability to speak English by making us speak Spanish, then we would never be successful in this country. So we didn't get taught that. And I know why she did it, and she did it from a place of love, and I could never fault her for that. But as someone who can relate to you, growing up and realizing how much I've lost, how much of my own identity I'm not even sure I have given myself the permission to claim, because I'm not I can't speak Spanish the way other people I grew up with could speak, or even I didn't grow up going back to the country my parents came from. I almost felt like I didn't have the right to claim my own identity. And that's been a journey, just getting back to the place of like, am I allowed to say I'm Latina? Am I allowed to be proud of my heritage if I'm not the image of embodying every piece of it? And so it is a complicated, I think, journey, and one that is riddled with a lot of guilt and self-loathing. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but a lot of, just because your parents are immigrants doesn't mean they're not racist. And a lot of us come from countries where our grandparents and our parents, like, there's still white supremacy all over the world. And, my grandparents would say things to me like, don't be in the sun, like, get out of the sun, pinch your nose so it's not so fat, like I knew that I looked and was a way that even they considered less than, and I had been taught to hate those things about myself. And so when you're taught that your success is based on running away from the things that you are, there's so much complexity in then as an adult trying to go back and reclaim those pieces of your identity and say, no, I love my brown skin, and I love the nose that I got from my great-great-grandfather who was a warrior. And I get, that is such a personal journey and a painful one, and one that for me is rooted in a lot of trauma.
So you kind of went over kind of the answer to my question, but it was more about, did you ever find yourselves or in your conversations with people find times in your life or times in their lives where, when living in between those two worlds, picking one and kind of giving up the other one, and then like later on in life having to go back and then like rediscover that other world that you had like shunned or set aside?
Yeah, I think that's part of what I was just speaking to, which is my whole life I had been taught to just count, just be so grateful for what my parents had given me by coming to this country, that I'd won the lottery, that I got to be an American, and that meant there was no limits, and my life would have been so much more worse if I had been born and raised in Honduras, and so why even question what that life would have been like, because it would have been so horrible, is the picture that had been painted for me for so long. I'd never been given the permission to even think about what had been lost, and much less mourn what had been lost, but when you're grown up and you think, wow, I spent so much of my life ignoring that part of myself and running from that part of myself. Is it even there? Do I have it in me? Can I find it? Can I somehow root myself in what is my past and what is my history? But I'm not even sure how much of it has informed the person I am today. And actually, my second piece in the book, it speaks a lot to that journey for myself particularly.
When you were talking about, am I even allowed to say that I am Latina? I feel like, because I'm Mexican American, but I'm also Native American. But because I don't know the percentage, and I don't know everything about the tribe that my family and my ancestors were from, I just know that I am. And people ask me sometimes, like, how come you don't ever do jokes about being Native American? And I'm like, well, I didn't grow up on the res. I don't really know too much. Like, I don't know too much. And then I went through a season where I really invested time in trying to get to know the culture. And I would go to powwows, and I would go and do dance in the circles, and I would, like, my whole room was decked out in, like, Native American, like, anything I could find. And I was wearing, like, my feathers and my choker and turquoise. And then I would meet somebody who was, like, really Native, and then I would, like, shut down because I'm like, oh, well, I'm not as much as them, so let me take this off. I'm a fake. You know what I mean? And it was like, that was a battle for me, because I don't know too much. I wasn't raised in it, but I know I am. I know that's my blood. So it's like, am I allowed to still say it?
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, Angela. Hi, America. Wow, I'm in love with you guys. My question is, I'm a 16-year-old Muslim Pakistani American living in this quote-unquote new America where, I was born after 9/11, and so hearing about times where Muslims weren't really a target is kind of a concept to me. And now you see people coming up, people of color, people of different religions coming out, sharing their stories. And it's like what you guys were saying earlier, that if you're not, like, your parents speak broken English and you came to this country on horseback with 13 babies in your arms, the people kind of overlook that. So as the youth and the previous generation are sharing these stories and getting our voices heard, what advice do you have for us? What do we need to do to kind of show that we do belong and we do have a voice and we're just as American as everyone else?
You're going to hate this answer. Sorry, please applaud her question. I didn't mean to. Because it is going to sound so trite, but truly, truly, the most revolutionary thing that you can do is to love yourself. Because I think what we are saying is that we grew up not loving ourselves. We grew up feeling like we had to apologize for what we were, and we had to hide ourselves and shrink this part of ourselves when we're with these people, and that part of ourselves when we're with those people. And that is a painful journey that does nobody any good. And we're all on this journey of trying to find our way back to, how do we love our full selves? And that's the opportunity that you have as a 16-year-old, is to deny the hate in your body and in your space and say, I will not give my energy to hating myself. I think that is a revolution in itself. And Linda Sarsour writes this stunning piece in the book about the neighborhood she grew up in that sounds like Sesame Street in Brooklyn. And the radical love, it's her term, the radical love that her family and her neighborhood, they were Muslim, they were Hondurans, they were Puerto Ricans, they were, everything. They came from everywhere. And she grew up only knowing radical love until 9/11, where things changed for her. It's a beautiful piece, but it really highlights this idea that you won't have to go back and fix it. Like, you're not going to fix the world, and the world is going to be the world. But if you commit and stay devoted to loving everything that you are and loving the people around you who are like you and who aren't like you, that I think is really the only thing that we can do. And I think so much good will come of that.
And our
Co-sign.
final question for the evening.
Hi, America. Thank you so much for sharing that story about the professor at USC. It really touches me to know. I'm so happy to know that Latina is in college because of our efforts to get representation. I'm so happy that you're such a force for good and that you've used your platform to speak for immigrants and Latinos and women, and especially now when we need women's voices to be loud and proud. And so thank you so much for what you do. My question to you is, and I know this because I've been in this business for more than 30 years, trying to get Latinas on screen, right? But what kind of roles do you want to play? What are the most bold characters that you've yet to play that no one's writing for you? Like, what would you want to play if men really understood women and were writing better roles for women? What kind of roles would you be playing or movies would you be producing?
Wow, that's such a big question. You can answer that question too. I mean, honestly, it's the same. I think that what I want to see on TV and film and what I want to see in our culture is what I want to see in our world. I want to see women who look like me in positions of authority, positions of dignity, positions of power. I want to see women who look like me be doctors and lawyers and politicians, but I want to see women who look like me who aren't those things, who might be housekeepers and nannies and educators, live lives that are full and dimensional and dignified. Like, I don't care what the job is, just write a human being. Somebody said, like, here's a good trick, write it as a white man and then make it a woman, because it's more likely that it's going to be a full human if somebody writes it from that perspective. And that is a sad, awful truth. But I don't know, like, I don't think about my career and the next job I'm going to do as like, oh, I really want to be like a badass FBI agent. You know, I usually look for the kernels of dignity. And like the show that I'm on now, Superstore, which seems like a very benign sitcom about, you know, people who work at a big box store, you know, nothing original. But what drew me to that story was it was something that we are missing so gravely in our culture right now. Like, people who are just people, everyday working people, working to survive, who aren't the #1 FBI agent or the best brain surgeon in the world, but they're living lives of dignity and they're living lives of humor and they're intelligent and their lives are consequential to them and to the world that they live in, regardless of, you know, whatever big flashy things are or aren't happening around them. And so I know that that's like probably not a very satisfying answer, but it truly is my only guiding light. You know, I don't know how to do it any other way. Like, if a script comes to me, or I'm reading a book to think of developing or producing, or if I'm producing a TV show, I'm looking for the kernels of like, where are women getting to be full human beings, the good and the bad? Where are people of color getting to be expressed in all the ways that they can be expressed, and not just the good saint or the hardworking, you know, mom, or the, you know, the long-suffering wife, you know, all these tropes that are so, anybody in this room could write those tropes because we know them so well. You know, how do we begin to allow women and people of color to exist in the world as their full selves? And I want to see that on screen, and I want to see that in real life.
That's amazing. I say cosign, and I do want to be the badass FBI agent, so write me in.
Oh, you want to be?
I want to see. I want to play and see me on TV. The Latina who is not fully this and not fully that, and am I allowed to? That whole struggle that we talked about right in the beginning that we didn't get to see on TV and whatever, so it felt shameful. I would love to be able to liberate someone from taking that shame and guilt off of, I don't speak my language, but I'm still proud of this part of my culture and who I am. I would love to see that story and play that. So
Yeah.
Well, ladies, thank you very much.